Now the other thing that I really want to show you is these bevel and regroup options. The regroup options are new to ZBrush 4 R6. And it'll be more relevant, more apparent why they're there later on. But the basic functionality is that it will unify surfaces. So for example, this is a surface, front-facing surface, front-facing surface, front-facing surface, front, 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 front. If I do not have regroup panel on, then each one of these is kind of separated out. If I undo that, and I put regroup panels on, then everything that's front-facing gets a polygroup. The panels themselves all still have separate colors. So the loops, I mean. The loops here and 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 here, they're all separated, but we can also adjust that with this regroup loops option. So this front-facing has a couple of ramifications. One of them we're gonna look at in the instrument panel. But one of the things that it connects to is a new feature that's down in polygroup that's called group front. And that comes from a feature which was in a little while ago, group by normal. So the group by normal means that there's a particular vector. You know, it just looks at the normal and says if you face one direction or another, we're going to polygroup you a certain way. Let me just do that right now. So everything facing one direction is getting that polygroup. It's kind of cool. But let's undo that. Let's try just panel looping it without regroup panel on. We're going to say panel loop. So separate, separate, separate. And now I'm going to go into polygroups and I'm going to say group front. And then of course, we really got to work that angle. But see, things become complicated because it's looking at front from a different angle. It's a different kind of calculation than what it's able to do on the fly when it's doing the actual extraction itself. So regroup panel is kind of an evolution of it. It's all wrapped up into one operation in panel loops, so you're able to get better results. So now I'm going to regroup loops and just click panel loops. So everything that's outward facing is one group. Everything that's part of that loop is all another group. Let's kind of zoom in. Now you can see it's still keeping this separate group. You can't see it very well. But this is one group, and then there's this other group, and then another group in there. This is actually very, very, very useful when you get into more specific hard surface stuff. It's not a major feature that the entire feature set depends on, but it's an add-on that makes things more just easier when you get into some of the more complicated stuff that Pixologic wants you to start to get into. Okay, let's take a look at, I'm going to turn these off just so that their calculation doesn't affect us. Let's take a look at the bevel. I'm going to set the bevel to 100, panel loop this. Okay, let's just snapshot that. I'm going to undo that and take my bevel all the way down. Okay. So can you categorize or explain what is the difference between a bevel at 100 or a bevel at 10 or 17? So more curvature is one way. The depth of the bevel. But then see, things get confusing because there's also this elevation slider, right? So what's depth? Is depth at elevation, or, and then what is bevel? And then what's this bevel profile? So Daniel says the amount of bevel between polygroups. So the phrase, the amount of bevel, would basically say that it's a multiplier on the bevel profile. So it's the bevel profile times 0.5, or the bevel profile times 1. Or it's the length of the profile, or of the bevel, I should say. You know, this being the bevel, versus not a lot of bevel right there. Let's set it to 0. There's no bevel whatsoever. So the first thing that this tells me is that if 0 is no bevel, I mean, it's still there. If we come in and say press shift, we'll still see those polygroups. We just don't get that bevel created. If 0 kind of neutralizes that, then what that tells me right away is that it's a multiplier of something. You know, 0 times anything equals 0. The general way to phrase this is that, in my view, it's a multiplier on the entire bevel equation or algorithm. So that's included of the profile and the elevation. So I don't know, let's say the amount of bevel would equal, let's see, the bevel profile plus elevation multiplied by the bevel setting. Now, the reason why I'm kind of breaking it up like this is because that's how it is in the program. When they write the code, it is, if you've done programming before, you'll know that they have to define a variable. That variable is bevel. Then they have to, you know, and elevation, and bevel profile is basically an array, and they have to do an algorithm as simple as this. The amount of bevel or the amount of separation is, you know, your bevel profile plus your elevation multiplied by your bevel setting. Now let's come in and set this back to 50, and let's start messing with elevation. Does that even make a difference? Is anybody seeing a difference? Okay, you can see it really a little bit easier here. So let me zoom in. This is one line, and if it's a negative 100, you're going to see the bevel pushing in. If it's a positive 100, you're going to see the bevel pushing out. Is there a time in which you would need to push the bevel in? Absolutely. If you're pushing the bevel, if you have, let's say, an instrument panel, you may very well want to do the bevel towards the inside. If you've kind of already polished off the silhouette of a mech suit, you're probably going to want to bevel it inside, not outside, and add more volume. That volume compounding as you keep doing stuff. So negative is possible. 0, still pushing out, but it's not pushing out as far as this. So this was 100, then there was 0, and then there was 50. And then negative 100 is still 0, but it kind of just, everything pulls in. So let's set that back. Take a look at this profile, and for that we need to look this way, I think. Panel loop that. There we go. See how straight that is, and then down, and you get a nice cavern. So you don't just have to have bevels. Now, how many people know how to work with curves? Give me a shout out if you know how to adjust curves inside of ZBrush. All right, so then how do you get rid of this dot? If I've got this dot here and I want to get rid of it, how are you going to remove that? If you just click on it and you drag it out, it's gone. If you click inside here, it just adds another one. But notice how soft that is? So one thing you can do is, with this guy selected, you just drag this circle down, right? But even then, it's still a little on the soft side. You're still getting a little bit of that ease in, ease out, if you know animation terminology. So what you do is you drag it out and then back in. So if I take this guy and I drag it out and back in, well, let's delete him. All right, so there we got a little curve. And this one seems pretty set. Okay, well, we're stuck now, but basically you drag them out, back in, they can kind of change their mode from there. Okay, now let's get a little bit more complicated. So that's pretty useful. That's going to come out and in like that. So let's make that a little bit easier for us to understand. Okay, panel loops, there we go. Now we've managed to kind of close them and create a really nice rounded bevel. But we really, the point of this is that it's a real simple system. So we need to kind of dial this back a little bit, give ourselves some room, and then panel loop it. Let's just try this. Okay. So I'll let you guys experiment with that. I'm going to reset, draw in there, drag those out, back in, out, and back in. And there we go. I use these grids to help. And panel loop that, and we're kind of back to normal for the most part. Let me zoom out. Okay. Higher loops to better see what it is doing. Thanks, Mads. Yes. In fact, you know what? Let me show you this. I want to highlight what Mads talking about. Out and back in. Okay. So Mads was suggesting increase your loops, so you can see more specifically what this thing is doing. So let's just panel loop that now. Come on. Delete lower. Okay. And panel loop that. So we'll have more stuff in here to kind of figure this out. Let's just load this. There you go. Voila, voila, and voila. And that's fitting this. Okay. So real simply, you can imagine this profile fitting in and facing this direction. So it's a little bit hard to kind of do the mental abstraction of how this profile points straight up, but really it's going to be the edge of that form. It would have been nicer if it was facing off to the side and you had a shape like that. But that would have required a little bit more work. Okay. Let's undo that. That's kind of enough for now, and maybe if we lower these, that's the last thing I want to try. Yeah. Then we'll get a little bit more of a tongue and groove. So watch your height. Might want to find where is it that they intersect. Maybe right above here. Both sides coming in like that. Okay. So bevel elevation, bevel profile, regroup, polish, all of that stuff we've kind of looked at now in terms of panel loops. And it's just, that stuff just gets you kind of going. The most important thing that panel loops does is it creates these two separate groups. So that you can come in and say select these guys. And then you could use things like, say, the H polish brush. I just pressed B and then H. And H polish can really help you fine-tune stuff. You've got to be mindful when you're working with visibility like this. And we don't want to get to that level of detail just yet, but you might accidentally start to really refine those edges. Don't do that yet. I want to show you the entire workflow. So let me ask you, before we move on, what's the difference between groups, loops, and panel loops? Let me say it that way. Jim, double's not pressed right now, or were you talking about another setting? Oh, double. Yes. Okay, let's ask this question. What's the difference between groups, loops, and panel loops? Extraction and bevel. And also that group, the regroup option. So the group front. So extraction, bevel, the group front functionality, and don't forget polish. Now we're working with a sphere right now, so you're not really noticing this, but polish is what you're going to notice when we get into the next phase of things, when we get into the vehicle demo. So the whole system is designed to try to make things a little bit more